I am going to do an animation breakdown of an entire episode of this show. I don't know if Netflix will let me. I don't know if they'll try and copyright claim me. I don't know if maybe I have to do it in like 15 separate distinct episodes so that the copyright bots stay off my trail. But I'm going to find a way to do it if it's all this well animated. Because we need to talk about that. Hello, siblings and slap fighters. My name is TB Skyen, and we finally have an extended look at the animation of Arcane. This 2-minute clip comes to us courtesy of Netflix's Geeked Week event, which is going on simultaneously with E3, because, you know, it's not like anyone needs to have free time during this freaking 2-month period or whatever. But it gives us our first real extended look at the style of Arcane. Before, we only really had like little momentary clips here and there, which looked very good, but didn't really give me a sense of what the filmmaking of this project is going to be like. This clip, on the other hand, aims to change that, and my word, is the quality of this thing not looking fantastic. I think so. Now, Necrit has already published a video where he speculates on a lot of sort of the lore connections and what the story might be saying about things that happened directly in the series, so I won't really bother with that too much, because he said most of the same stuff that I would say anyway. Instead, we're going to be looking at the thing that interests me the most, frankly, and I'm sorry to the writers of this show. I was just like, the animation is always better. The animation's better, I care more about it. Which is the character animation, which is, lots of good stuff to go on here. So, we'll start at the beginning. And we'll start with this establishing shot where nothing happens. And that's kind of important, actually. This establishing shot is all about establishing the mood of the scene. Also the place, like, oh, okay, we're in a broken window thing, shop, some kind, whatever. It's about establishing that, but it's also about establishing the mood of the scene. And what we see here is we get a pretty good look at the inside of the shop, right? Like, we can kind of see there's no one else in here. This is old, dilapidated, run down, and abandoned. It's very quiet. Like, there's light streaming in through the glass. There's completely undisturbed dust in the air. Absolutely nothing happens in this shot until Jinx shows up. Like, she's the first thing that moves here. Now, imagine if we had introduced this scene differently. Imagine instead of getting this shot from the inside, waiting for Jinx to enter the space. Like, we're already here, and she enters to where our perspective is. Imagine if we were looking at this from Jinx's perspective. Imagine if you were looking over her shoulder as she's walking towards this dark window, like leading into this old abandoned shop, and she's like putting her hand on, she's kind of peering inside. That would be a very different mood, right? Like, there would be a tension of like, what will we find inside? Not necessarily like a horror tension, but there would be this tension of like, we don't know what's in there, we don't know what she's gonna find, but because our perspective is in there already, we already know what she's going to find, which is absolutely nothing. Like, there's no one in here, there's no tension, there's no danger. It's about establishing the mood of the scene. And that's important because the tension here shouldn't really be, oh, will she find someone in there? Will it be a confrontation over that? The tension here should be about Jinx and how she approaches the environment. And speaking of how she approaches it, the Jinx that we know in League of Legends, how would she enter this shop? Well, I think when confronted with an opportunity to walk in through a broken window like that, Jinx would go over here and then blow an even bigger hole in the window because she would think that that was quite funny. This is not our Jinx. Not yet. This is Jinx before whatever happens that turns her eyes purple and makes her kind of Joker-fied, like sort of screaming and laughing and obsessed with explosions. This is a very different Jinx, and you can see that from the first moments of, like, the way that she moves. What she does is she carefully sort of touches the side panel of this window, lifts her foot up over, and you can see, like, she's even holding out, like, this arm here to balance her. She's being very cautious and careful not to disturb anything. She's trying not to kick the window as she enters. She's being careful not to cut herself or hurt herself in any way. It's this very sort of careful, cautious mood of someone who's, like, entering a space, but who doesn't want to be heard or seen necessarily, and who doesn't want to cause any kind of a fuss or a ruckus, at least not yet. And that also comes through in her body language, like generally, like her posture. Like, look at as she puts one foot down, the way that she leans in both to lift her leg, but also to look around. Like, you can see she kind of leans forward to get a better look at, like, the chairs and the stuff that's stuck over here. looking around at everything that's here. And it's this very cautious, careful, slow, even pensive movement that she's doing. And then as she enters the space here, we see her hand brush over this little bit of metal lattice work, or whatever it is, and brushes this little bit of dust off. And by the way, if you're familiar with animation breakdowns on my channel, yes, that dust is hand animated. And as you can see here, it is animated on 1s and 2s. It's animated on 1s as she brushes it off immediately. You can see on every frame, the animation moves. And in 2D animation, that's called animating on 1s, because you're animating on every one frame. Then as it falls down and slows down and sort of spreads out and just turns to dust in the air, it slows down a little bit in terms of its frame rate as well, and now it's animated on every other frame. As you can see, like, you can check that against Jinx's movement, is that here's a frame where nothing happens, then something happens, nothing happens, something happens, nothing happens, something happens. That's animating on 2s, because you're animating on every 2 frames, like on every other frame. And that's how traditional, well, it's how all film and animation works, really, but that's how traditional animation kind of counts out its frame rates, is to say we're animating on 1s, 2s, 3s, or 4s. So that would translate to a frame rate of, like, usually 24 frames per second in a normal, like, film reel, or 12 frames per second if you're animating on 2s, or 8 frames per second if you're animating on 3s, or 6 frames per second if you're animating on 4s. And anime, especially low-budget anime, can sometimes be animated on, like, 8s. Like, it can be animated at some extremely, extremely low frame rates, whereas very high-budget animation, like Disney animation, will be animated usually on 2s, sometimes even on 1s, which is extremely expensive and time-consuming, which is why not a lot of studios do it for 2D animation. In 3D animation, though, you can just tell the computer to, like, generate more frames. It's a little more complicated than that, but broadly speaking, you can just do that, and so there's not that much consideration given to limiting frame rates for budgetary reasons. Instead, what animators will do with 3D animation is they'll limit the frame rate of the character for aesthetic reasons. You can see that with a lot of modern 3D animation, is that they'll imitate the look of lower frame rate animation in order to achieve a certain kind of aesthetic. In anime, you'll usually see this applied to, like, crowd scenes, when the crowd is 3D animated, which is, like, people complain about that a lot, but it's a sensible way to do it. The crowd will be 3D animated, but they'll move on, like, 2s or 3s or 4s to mimic the general frame rate of the show. Anyway, Jinx walking into the shop. We're kind of supposed to be talking about this animation, aren't we? Walking into the shop, she, like, gets this dust on her fingers from here, and you can see how she, like, kind of gathers her fingers together, kind of to sort of roll the dust between her fingers, and she brings it up, and she kind of, you can see she kind of looks at it, and you can see she's investigating. She's feeling the place out. So she sees all this dust, and she's like, well, no one's been here in a long time. It's that kind of vibe, like a detective inspecting a crime scene a little bit. But also, look at her mood. Like, look at the way she's walking into the space. Look at the way that she's looking around. Is that a completely relaxed disposition that she has? Does she feel completely at ease? Is she, like, very, well, I'm completely comfortable here. I'm not even worried about anything even a little bit? No. That's not really the posture that she has here. She's not threatened or scared or anything like that, but there is a tension there where she's looking around, and, like, you can see she keeps her jaw very steady. In fact, she's keeping her jaw a little bit clenched, as we shall find out later. And her eyes are wide open. Her brows are knitted a little bit, like they're a little bit down. And her eyes are wide open. She's looking at everything. She's being sort of very, very conscious and aware of the space that she's in. Again, not frightened, not angry, but there's a tension. There's just a little bit of tension there. Now we enter Jinx's perspective. We see the shop from her perspective. And the little underboob on the creatures over here. Now, I don't think these are meant to be Naga or Lamia. Like, I don't think they're meant to be Cassiopeia type creatures, like, because I think that right there and there is supposed to be like a mermaid's tail. So I think they're meant to be mermaids, which will also fit a little bit more with the carnival atmosphere of the place. Where we have what seems to be some sort of target practice. I think probably the thing where you throw balls at things to score points or whatever. And even our arcade cabinet here in the back, where maybe you can play League of Legends Project L or Project F, the fighting game. Maybe they have that on that console over there, and that's the only place you can play it right now until Riot releases a public beta. And one thing I want you to notice here is notice the colors of this shot. Because the colors aren't accidental. They're entirely chosen by the animators. They're chosen by the animators and directors, and they are part of the storytelling. What do the colors and the light tell you about this scene? Well, we know Jinx is a very colorful character, right? Like, this electric blue hair, like bright purple-pink trousers. There's graffiti on the side of the arcade cabinet over here, which, like, that's probably very bright paint, like graffiti usually tends to be. These mermaid creatures surely must have been painted in pretty bright colors. And then there's the stained glass, which also, again, if this is some kind of funhouse or entertainment venue, surely they would have been very bright colors, but that's not what we get when we look at the place. What we get when we look at the place is very pale, very desaturated, and very dusty. Like even the air in here, you can see, like, if you... In fact, we can just zoom in. I have that power. I'm using Premiere Pro to examine this. Even the air back here, you can see this big... Like, really no flat colors, but everything seems dusty. Like, every color, every surface, everything is kind of dusty and pale. And very desaturated. And that does a couple of things. First of all, these are the aesthetics of realism. Not actual realism. Actual realism doesn't look like this, but it's the aesthetics of realism. When you have this sort of desaturated, sort of downbeat, sort of lower color palette with sort of bright white natural light that kind of washes out everything, the sense that you get is one of something that's more grounded than a cartoon, for example. A cartoon where all the colors are saturated and everything's bright. That's a very different aesthetic. These are the aesthetics of realism, the aesthetics of groundedness. And that's going to be important because we can contrast that against something else that's going to be happening later on in the scene. But all of the shots so far, every single one, have been only about establishing this scene, right? Jinx walking in, taking in the space, sort of just feeling out what it's like to be back here, looking around. Nothing really happening, just a lot of shots just establishing what this place feels like to be in, and giving us a look at Jinx and how she reacts to being here, like that odd inquisitiveness that she seems to have, that also feels very familiar. Like, it feels like she's entering a space that she knows. And here's where we get the first shift in her presentation, the first shift in how she is looking, how she's holding her body. So remember how I talked about how her eyebrows are down and her jaw is a little bit clenched. Look what happens now. You see that? You see that little move right there? Her jaw unclenches as she opens her lips, and her eyebrows like release their tension on the face a little bit as they raise. And you can see like her eyes, like her eyelids go down a little bit, they lid a little bit, for one moment, because she sees this thing. She's having a reaction to it. It's triggering something in her, some kind of memory, some kind of feeling, something that makes her all of a sudden unclench for a moment, release that tension that she's holding in her body, and instead sort of go into herself, go into her memories, and remember this thing which she's clearly recognizing. And then we get this lovely shot, I really like this, where this is the punching machine that Jinx is going to use later, right? And we're seeing Jinx essentially from the perspective of the punching machine, and it's being used, like, along with this railing right here. You can see how the punching machine is forming a frame around the scene. So the whole scene here of Jinx looking at this thing is framed around the place where the metal plate that she's holding is coming from, which I just think is like a lovely little way to frame the shot. There's another shot in a little bit that's also really a really lovely bit of framing. By the way, this character, this is not Vi. I saw some people theorize about that because of the hair that's pink, so like seems like a reasonable expectation, but no, this is not Vi. This is the big eyebrows, large hair dude who walks with them in the first trailer we got for Arcane, who it looks from what we can see in the trailers, and again, Nikrit has more on this than I do, but it looks from what we see in the trailers that he's like betrays them to some other gang or joins the bad guys somehow. Like they have some antipathy towards him. Nikrit thinks this guy might be Warwick. I'm not so sure. But, like, he's gonna be some minor secondary villain, I think, in the show. At least that's my read on it so far. So, Jinx gets up, and again, like, look at the way she's getting up. Like, the way that she's getting up from this crouch is, like, you can see she steadies herself on one, like, her arm on one knee, and, like, pushes herself up. But it's this slow rise. Like, we can see she's almost kind of dragging her upper body up. So it's not, again, what you'd expect from in-game Jinx, the Jinx that we know right now, is that when she gets up, she would, like, get up with a bounce. Like, she'd get up like, boing! ready to do trouble or whatever. This Jinx is much more languid, much more slow, and in this moment a little bit more relaxed. And you can see she's looking over at the punching machine, and again, those little tiny gestures. It's the little things, man, that excite me. You see that? That little flicker of the eye? That's the kind of gesture like that tells you that the character is thinking. The character is somewhere in their head, like they're thinking about something, they're remembering something. And then she looks over at the scoreboard, of course. The scoreboard, which is a lovely bit of storytelling in and of itself, because it tells us something about Vi. Specifically tells us, like, we have Clag down here at the bottom of the scoreboard with 975 points. Then we have Clag seeing a significant improvement in his punching skills at 1,533. So, like, Clag has clearly learned something and gotten quite good at punching relative to what he was. Then there's Vi with 1,800, 1,900, 2,400, 2,900, 3,100, 3,400, 3,800, 3,900, 4,200, and then 4,800. So, like, if this is like a normal person who's pretty good at punching, Vi is a person who is incredibly good at punching, like more good at punching than you would expect most people to be. Like, so we get this little bit of storytelling about just how good Vi is. It's not just that she has so many scores on the scoreboard, it's that her score improves from 1,849 to 4,800, which is like an improvement by 3,000 of points of whatever the hell it is this machine measures. It's a huge progression. So you can see here, like, we get this bit of storytelling that, okay, Vi put in a lot of time here. She put in a lot of effort to this to get good at doing the punching on the punching machine. Which I quite appreciate, and clearly, like, that board distracts Jinx and keeps her distracted for a while, because we get this shot now. Again, there's a little bit of framing, like we can see the booth, the throwing balls at target's booth, is being used to create a frame around her. But what I really like about this shot is it's so thematic to what's going on here, because this is Jinx framed against this bright, beautiful stained glass window that was probably once like colorful and light and cheerful and happy, but now it's shattered and broken. And she's standing there in that shop reliving like those feelings, reliving the same, like a bunch of feelings of happiness that has been shattered. As we shall see once we get to the punching machine, that's what this scene is about. It's about Jinx going through some pretty complicated emotions about a happiness that has been lost to her. But that's not what happens in the next shot here. What happens in the next shot is bird. And again, some storytelling telling us something about Jinx's character, because her immediate reaction upon hearing the tiniest little noise of a bird just like landing on a thing is like, she doesn't even need time to look over and see what's going on. Hand to the gun out of the holster, pull the thing, turn around, level the gun at whatever made the noise. There's nothing, like, no looking over and going, holy shit, it's a bird, and then drawing a gun. Just, no, there was a noise. I was not expecting a noise. I was lost in thought for a second. This thing surprised me. What's her immediate response to that? Instantly, her response to that is, I need to be ready to kill someone. Like, that's her first reaction. That's her first expectation of, like, being surprised by anything is, someone's gonna hurt me, I need to hurt them first. I need to defend myself. Which tells you something about Jinx as a character right here. It tells you something about perhaps what she's been through. And what kind of approach she has to the world right now, how she feels being in the world, and what she feels is not safe. Clearly. Like, if that tiny little noise is enough to make her react like that. And she lives in, like, Zaun, which is a dangerous place to be, so, like, obviously, but it tells you something about who Jinx is as a person. That's her immediate response. And let's have a closer look at this bit of animation, because, like, it's very fast, right? Like, it's like, yeah, it's like barely a second and a half from the moment she grabs her gun to the moment when it's leveled at the bird. So let's have a closer look at it. We get this close-up of her hip, and you can see, like, not only is she grabbing the gun, but if you pay attention to her legs and the feet, you can see that she's dropping her weight a little bit. Like, she's bending her knees a little bit to stabilize herself some more. Grabbing the gun, and then she shifts her position, pulls her leg forward, so that she can get her, like, her shoulder forward with the gun, And you can see now her leg has shifted over to that position, and she's like sideways on, presenting as small a target as possible, gun forward, proper shooting position. Well, proper for Zon, I'm sure someone who's actually been in the army or whatever could tell me everything that's wrong with her gun posture right here. But it happens very quickly. And there's a couple of interesting things. So, note the shape of the barrel here, right? Completely round. Well, I mean, it's clearly machined and a little bit rough around the edges, but it's a very round, circular barrel, right? It's not an oval, is what I'm getting at. Well, look what happens here as she spins the gun around. Look how it gets stretched. Look at the squash and stretch going on this gun. We'll also talk about the other stuff that's going on, but look at the squash and stretch. Look how it's becoming completely oval, sort of being squashed in the direction of the circular motion that it's spinning. You can see that again here as well. And also, they're doing doubling. Essentially, they're smearing the gun out a little bit, like they're sort of distorting its shape to accentuate the spin that it's going through, but they're also doubling it, which means they're taking the character model and copying it and making it appear multiple times. Gun barrel here, gun barrel here, gun barrel here. Which is a technique that's stolen directly from 2D animation. Like, again, as we talked about, 2D animation often has to work, like, it can't animate things on every single goddamn frame, so they've come up with all kinds of interesting techniques to imply motion and imply smoothness that sort of helps get the fluidity of motion across using fewer actual frames of animation. And one of the things that 2D animation came up with a long time ago is stuff like this, doubling and smearing, in order to, like, really kind of smooth out the motion of something that happens. And something I've been so pleased with in 3D animation over the past 5 or 6 years now is that 3D animation has been reclaiming more and more of those techniques from 2D animation, smearing, not squash and stretch, but like animation smears, doubling, and like using things like speed lines to communicate speed. We'll see that later when Vi is doing her punching, which helps make these motions flow so much better. And like, as you can see in real time, you barely see this. Like, right? So like all of this hard work of like doubling and smearing and squashing and stretching, it's all in the service of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames ish at 24 frames per second, which is like a third of a second. And yet they do it because it helps make the movement work a little bit better. Now look at Jinx's expression, right? So what we know here is that she heard a tiny little sound of nothing that's not gonna hurt her. She was startled by a bird and her immediate response was violence. Look at her expression. Right? This is not anger. This is not like bared teeth and I'm gonna kill you. This is not like rage or some kind of extreme emotional expression. It's a very, very neutral expression, which in my opinion makes it a little scarier. Is that in this moment she's whipped this gun out and she's ready to kill. And emotionally, she looks very, very neutral in the face. Not distressed, not afraid, not angry, just like, there's something I need to kill. It's like this mask comes down over her face almost, giving her this very, very blank expression. Which I think is interesting. But there is a moment where it slips a little bit. Because here you can see, again, that little flicker of the eye that I love. Oh, one thing. The secondary motion of the braids. Let's talk about that. So she does this movement, right? You can see she makes this big move. You can see the braids start to swing around her. And then what we see here is that she is snapped into position. Like, literally snapped into position. With the gun forward, pointing directly at the thing that startled her. She has made this really sudden, strong, snappy, extremely precise and controlled movement. Look at what the braids do. They swing all the way around her and kind of basically spank her ass. Because she's done this movement so quickly and so suddenly that they're still halfway through moving when she's done doing the thing that she's doing. That secondary motion tells you something about how fast and snappy that motion was. It tells you something about how still she's standing right now. These things are just dangling off her like streamers. Which again, good use of secondary motion to communicate the mood of the character. Anyway, there. That. You see that little tiny jiggle of the eyes? This is like when she's still not quite realized Like, this is the... What just made that noise? She's investigating. There. That little eye movement, that's the moment of her realizing, oh, bird. And then when she realizes bird... See that right there? You see those little... Like, her skin is smooth, and as she tilts her head, you see those little tension lines appear on her face, as though the muscles inside are contracting. But she's not really letting it show through. And you can see her lip curling and that little sneer of disdain appear on her face. So, like, mostly she has a completely flat, neutral expression, right? Like, mostly she just has these bright, like, these very wide eyes and this stock-still, stony face. But there's these little details, that little bit of a hint that as she realizes that it was just a bird, she's not completely calm about it. She's not completely neutral about it. There's this flash of anger across her face as she realizes that she was startled by something that was just a stupid bird. And then you can see, like, as she comes to a rest again, it goes away. Like, she manages to smoothen it all out, flatten it all out again, as she keeps looking at this bird. But we get to see, for just the briefest little moment, that there's anger in there. Which the bird, unfortunately for it, does not perceive quite as clearly as we do, as she turns her head back and finally breaks her expression for a moment to give us a little bit of a, like, this tiny little bit of a hint of a grin, of a smile. And then she murders an animal. That's a thing that Jinx does. She sees a bird, which is no threat to anyone, which didn't do anything to harm her, which just happened to startle her. And her reaction to that is to murder an animal. So again, this is one of our indications that Jinx is maybe not okay. Like, maybe this girl, besides reacting instantly to a noise by pointing a gun at something, also murdering an animal is an indication that, you know, hey, maybe there's a bit of an empathy problem in her head right now. Maybe she doesn't have enough compunctions about using deadly violence against other living things. Maybe, even though she's not Jinx yet, even though she's not been Joker-fied, maybe even before that, she had some damage. As she fires the gun, recoil throws it up, and she uses that recoil basically just to spin herself around and go back to what she was doing. And in storytelling, like, this is the classic thing. If you want to show that a character is morally compromised, have them be cruel to an animal. Like, that's, in terms of, like, in films and TV, show them being cruel to an animal, and you'll have established immediately for the audience that, oh, okay, it's that kind of person. As someone maybe not to be f***ed with, and maybe also not to be trusted. Anyway, here's something I like in terms of acting again. Jinx brings the gun down, right? But she doesn't look at it. Her eyes don't even flicker to the gun. Not even once. She doesn't look at it. She just brings it down, and out of the side of her mouth, blows off the gun smoke. But she's not looking at the gun because she's focused on something else. Her eyes are pointing in the direction of the punching machine and the scoreboard. That's the thing she cares about. So, again, look at the doubling, look at the smearing, as she spins the gun around a couple of times, especially here, you can see it. Which gives you this sense of the gun spinning more than it really does. Because all it really does, like, it spins around, here's the front of the barrel. She only spins it in her hand once, right? Like, if you actually look at it. But because of the smearing and the doubling, you get this greater sense of speed and motion from it. As she spins it a second time and then snaps it to her holster. Now, the other thing to note, look at how she walks. Right? Again, the Jinx that we know, how would she go up those stairs? Well, she'd probably bounce. Like, she'd probably jump up the whole flight of stairs in one go, and she'd probably be very upright and sort of energetic as she does it. That's not how this Jinx walks. This Jinx trudges. Like, those are slow, heavy steps, and you can see, like, the front of her body's, like, hunched over as she's carrying the weight of the plate, but also perhaps the weight of something more emotional on the inside. She's not in any hurry. She's kind of just trudging over, dunk, with these heavy steps. And that hunched over, sort of forward-leaning mood that she has, it also gives me the sense, Like, it's a little bit like a lion circling its prey, right? Like, it's a little bit, it has a little bit of that sort of standoffish, predatory energy as she circles this punching machine, kind of looking at it out of the side of her eyes, which is when we finally get our first insight into what's going on inside her head that she's keeping such a tight lid on, the reason why her jaw is almost always clenched a little bit. It's this. Now, here's why I talked about so much about like the aesthetic, the lighting, the colors, the saturation and everything, is because we get this. How do you know that this is a flashback, that this is not happening at the same time and in the same space as Jinx, where she is in the present? Well, because everything is pink and golden and everything is suffused in light and the colors are extremely saturated in places in this shot. Because the color is different, because you have this soft light, which is often associated with like memory sequences. Because you have this bright golden light as well, which is also a thing that's often associated with memories. So you instantly understand, like when you get this flash, boom, of Vi doing some punches, you kind of instantly understand that, oh, okay, like this is not literally happening. We're getting a flash of something else that happened at some point. And because we've seen a movie before, because we understand film language, we understand, okay, we're getting flashbacks. But the important thing about this is that these flashbacks, I don't think they're voluntary. I don't think this is Jinx deciding to remember something about her sister using this punching machine. I think these memories are happening whether she likes them or not, and we get to see that in more explicit terms a little bit later. Anyway, punching. Punching is fun. Look at the punching ball here on the arm as it retracts. You see that? Like, the thing is actually completely spherical, but as it retracts, a little bit of squash and stretch as it gets smeared out. Also, they use motion blur. Which is an effect that you can do in 3D animation. This blurring right here, all that motion blur, that doesn't have to be there. Like, you can just not have that, because you can just tell the computer to, well, again, more complicated than that, but you can tell the computer to render the frames completely clean if you want to. You don't have to have the motion blur, you don't have to have the smearing. But this is something that a lot of 3D animation productions will choose to have to mimic the ways that movement that fast would look if you were filming it on film or in a digital camera. Because when you film something moving really, really fast on a digital camera or on film, then you get this kind of smearing, depending on how it interacts with the shutter speed of the camera. But 3D animation doesn't have to do that. It doesn't have to have that smearing. It's something that you decide to turn on. And so here it is. They're using that motion blurring, that smearing, to like give a certain aesthetic to the thing, but they're also doing something else. So first of all, boom. I believe that to impact there is hand animated. It doesn't necessarily have to be. I believe you can do this in 3D animation software as well. But I believe this impact and the other ones, like, these are hand animated impact frames to just sort of accentuate the power of Vi's punches as she hits. You can also begin to see it, and it's pretty unclear here. There's going to be some better shots of it later, but you can see the speed lines being applied to Vi's arm. So these horizontal lines following the movement, following the line of her movement, that emphasizes the power and speed of her smacking her arm into this thing. Which, again, it's a technique straight out of 2D animation. You'll see this in anime all of the time. They'll use smear frames like that to emphasize the power and speed of a hit, to make it more snappy, to make it feel more powerful. And here with Vi, it's being used extensively. You can even see it applied a little bit to the punching ball as it flies overhead and kind of snaps us out of the memory and back to Jinx, where we get this kind of creepy overhead shot of her, as though we're looking down on her from above as she's circling around this machine that's forcing her to relive these memories. And this shot, I think, is interesting, because take a look at where we are here. Like, before, we were up close with Vi. Like, we were basically right next to her doing the punching, as though we were standing right next to her with the phone camera filming the thing, and then we get punched in the face. But this shot right here is more interesting to me, because here the camera is completely steady and still, and it's as though we're sitting out in the audience, or like sitting somewhere else in the shop watching her work. And I think this is Jinx's perspective. Like, I think that's what the memory is of Jinx watching her sister do these punching exercises. Punching exercises which, by the way, Jinx learned something from watching. Here again, I love the smear here, as she like brings up for this like straight right into the thing. Look how the smear frames really help sell the power of that punch. And here again, like that hook, how much smearing is done there just to really sell how powerful it is. I also love the little droplets of sweat that actually also happens in the previous shot, right before the end. You can see how droplets of sweat just kind of come off of Vi, so again, selling the idea that she's working really, really, really hard, that she's putting in a lot of effort into this. And again, here we have a frame within the frame, where we are looking at Jinx from the perspective of the punching machine, which is something I really like. Like, that's a good way to establish that the relationship here, like, in terms of the action that's happening is between the machine and Jinx, is that they're looking at each other, essentially. Like, the machine can't look, but we're looking at Jinx from the machine's perspective, as it were. As, again, you can see that she's, like, holding this very neutral position, like, she's just being inquisitive, like, she's just looking around, nothing going on. I'm just, well, I guess I'll just put this thing back. Why not? Like, what harm could it possibly do? I'm just doing it for no good reason. And she walks back and kind of dusts her hands off and puts her hands on her hips and is like, yeah, I'm just putting this machine back together and, like, finding this thing and slotting it in where it needs to go and, like, flipping this switch and throwing this lever and turning everything back on with a completely neutral expression, because, like, I'm not having any severe traumatic experiences piped directly into my brain by my subconscious in a way that I can't control at all. I am not intentionally trying to replicate a past that is gone in order to grapple with some of the emotions that are associated with it, because that's what this scene is about. Jinx has returned to a place that was once important to her, and important to her sister. A place that once mattered to the both of them, in order to grapple with some really complicated and dark emotions. And in order to do that, it's not enough just to be there with the punching machine in its current condition. She tries to restore some part of that past. She tries to bring back some of what the place used to be. And when she does, what she finds is that, oh, well, wait, actually, this might be a little bit more than I could actually handle. Anyway, the dust coming off the handle here, hand animated, and the goop flowing through, like, the light that flows through is 3D generated, but these clouds of goop, I do believe those are hand animated. That's certainly what it looks like, especially here, and it looks really good. Like, there's the mixing of 2D and 3D animation that Fortiche has managed to do with their style is absolutely brilliant. And notice, again, one of the reasons why we talk so much about aesthetic, one of the way that we show that we transition from the present, the here and the now, to the past, to the flashback, is by the change in lighting, right? So neutral, sort of bright white, washed out colors and light, that represents the present. Bright, saturated, like very, very heavily saturated, sort of golden pink colors represent the past, and the pink color especially represents Vi. So look at what happens as she turns the machine back on. The light of the past creeps back. It doesn't saturate the scene as much as it does in the flashbacks. Like, in the flashbacks, the scene is, like, completely, like, just everything is suffused with nothing but highly saturated golden light, right? As Jinx turns the machine back on, like, it doesn't quite get there, but a lot of it comes back. A lot of that golden, pinkish light of the past comes back and intrudes into the scene. And as it does, as the light changes, as the light of the present-day scene becomes the light of the past, this happens. You can see it on her, right? Like, that we finally get a true insight, like a true direct link into how Jinx is feeling and what's going on in her head. And this pose that she's holding here, it's like, that's not a natural way to stand, right? Like, you wouldn't stand with your legs together and your arms down along your side, like, with your head kind of dropped forward, if you were just completely alright and normal, would you? Like, that's not a normal pose to take. That's a pose that she's taking because something's happening. Like, something is distracting her. She's very much going into herself here. And what's in her? Well, her sister's name. As we get this film grain sort of suffused all over everything. Film grain, by the way. Remember how the pink color is Vi's color, and that's the color of Vi's light? Yeah, the pink is around. And the pink also means something else in the context of Arcane, by the way. It's also the color of the chemical goop that we presume will eventually turn Jinx into the character that she becomes, like that it will eventually Jokerify her. like completely bleach her skin and give her bright pink eyes. But here, it's the color of Vi. And we can see that Vi is on her mind because it's literally scrawled all over the screen. It's just her sister's name over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. As though she can't not think about it. Intrusive. And you can also see that in her character acting and animation. Like, you see that? You see that? Like, that twitch? And, like, the way her brows come together completely here, like, you can see her whole face tensions up. And it's more than that. There's a lot of subtle stuff going on here, too, that's really cool. So let's zoom in on it. So, look at her eyes. And it's a little hard with all the stuff flashing in front of it. But you see how her eyes are, like, oh, you can see underneath the eyelids that, like, her eyes are moving and she's twitching. And, like, there's clearly... like, there's this rapid eye movement going on, which is what happens when you dream, by the way, also. Like, when you get taken in by really strong memories, you get rapid eye movement, and when you dream, you have rapid eye movement, because that's your visual imagination, that's your brain engaging its ability to form memories, to do visual imagination, or to give you really strong and uncontrollable flashbacks to traumatic events that you would rather not have to relive. And again, I don't want to sort of psychiatrically diagnose Jinx or anything, but the aesthetics of the scene are the aesthetics of someone having essentially PTSD flashbacks. Like, she's being thrust into some memories that she doesn't necessarily want to relive, but she can't stop them either. She can't stop herself from remembering this stuff. And what we get is a vision of the past that Jinx is, like, the feelings that she's trying to deal with, where did they come from? Well, here's Vi giving Jinx a stuffed toy. A stuffed toy, because of the X's over the eyes, I have to imagine this stuffed toy has been destroyed. It is dead, air quotes. That's why it has those X's over the eyes. And this is such a tender scene, right? Like, this is such a gentle, tender, loving scene between two sisters. You can see it in Jinx's expression. You can see it in that gentle, like, just careful hand that Vi is putting on her cheek, the way that she's just, like, gently brushing her hair out of her face. It's such a tender little scene. It's only for a few moments, but you can even see that Vi is smiling, right? Pay attention to what else you can see on Vi. Those are some very bloodied knuckles. Those are a lot of bruises on her fingers and hands. That's a big fat bruise on the side of her face. Jinx, on the other hand, is, like, she's clearly, like, she's got bags on her eyes and she's tired, but she's not beaten up, right? Which, again, the visual storytelling here, to me, is that Vi has these bruised knuckles and has this massive bruise on the side of her face because she's working really hard to keep Jinx safe. Like, to keep her little sister from having to do the ugly things that you might have to do in Piltover to survive. That's my read on it, anyway. And then we swap from that moment of incredibly tender love and care to something very different. And again, remember, all this scratching and scribbling across the screen, these X's, these hearts, that's Jinx's perception. That's Jinx's memories. That's how she perceives the scene. That's how she remembers. She remembers that this thing is dead. She remembers the love she felt for her sister in this moment. And she remembers how monstrous her sister looked to her in this moment when she does, and content warning for family violence here, that in this moment, Vi is essentially a monster to Jinx. Like, that's how scary she is. That's how traumatizing this moment is. And what we know about that scene from the lore is that Swain has a voice line with Jinx that says something along the lines of, faces fading in the flames, it was all her fault. Fiddlesticks, who preys on people's fears, who knows what people are afraid of and screams their fears back at them and uses it to terrify them, has a scream for Jinx that is, Jinx, all your fault, all your fault. So whatever happened here, Jinx blames herself for it. Like, her greatest fear is that it was her fault. That's a trauma that's driving her. And what we get from Vi doing this to her is that Vi probably thinks so as well. At least in this moment, Vi might be blaming Jinx for it, which is why it's so traumatizing that even her own sister blames her for whatever it is that happened here. And given that Swain says faces fading in the flame, it sounds like some people died, which might explain why Vi loses her composure so totally. One thing I want to point out is that this is not a punch. It's not better, like, it's not less abusive or anything, but it is an open-handed slap. Which is interesting to me for two reasons, because this is Jinx's left cheek. This is Jinx's left cheek. Here, an open hand doing a gentle, loving, kind, sisterly caress. Here, an open hand doing just about the most opposite of that which is possible. Like, as visual storytelling goes, it's a way to establish the contrast between the scenes, that this is a moment of love and kindness and caring, and this is not that. It's a very ugly moment, and it's one that you can see, like, Jinx reacts to. Again, you can see she sort of restores that flat mask over her face a little bit, but you can see, like, she's biting her lower lip. You can see that the nostrils are flaring. You can see the tension and the anger in her face as she's trying to hold on to some level of control over herself, but it's not working. And she explodes completely into misery. And again, flashback to just a moment of quiet tenderness between them. They used to be so close. They used to love each other a lot. And then, a moment later, a flash to a decidedly different moment of Vi being a lot less kind and a lot less caring. And to me, that's what this scene is about. Like, this is why Jinx is going back, because this is not what's happening with Jinx here. The feelings that she's working through, it's not just anger. It's also this. Like, it's not just that she hates her sister. It's also that she loves her. That it wasn't just, like, abuse and misery, that Vi cared for her. And that she cared for each other. It's not just about anger. It's also grief. It's also sadness. It's also shame. It's a lot, like, there's a lot going on here. It's not just that she's pissed off and wants to kill Vi. It's the betrayal. Like, it's all of it. It's a complicated emotional scene. Which is what leads us into the next moment here, where, again, look at the speed lines that are being used on the punching glove as it approaches, to kind of sell the power of it. And the thing I want you to notice here is that as Jinx does this, as she kicks rather than just punch, because that's the kind of person that she is, but you see how she kind of, like, as she does this move to kind of duck out of the way, you can see Vi behind her, like that ghost, kind of doing the same thing, but where Vi punches, Jinx just kicks instead, and then spins around to do this double punch. So it's not just that Jinx is, like, trying to outdo Vi. Like, she is. Like, that's part of the reason why she's doing what she's doing. Is, like, she's going to beat her goddamn score. She's going to spite the punch, is, like, the thing that's going through her head, right? But she's also imitating her. She's also doing what Vi does, and you can see that very explicitly here, where you get Vi with this, like, uppercut or cross-up or whatever it's called in boxing terminology, I don't know, with this punch going, like, from her hips below, moving up with the elbow. Jinx does the exact same thing over there. Right? Vi throws a punch here. Jinx throws a kick there, but she's mirroring her sister. She's mimicking her. It's not all about just trying to spite her or hate her. It's also about, like, it's also an act of trying to get closer to her in a way. Not in a positive way. Like, not in a healthy way, in any sense of the term. Again, hand-drawn impact frames, selling the power of the punch. It's not, like, it's not good, but it's not just hate or anger. It's not just that. It's both types of memories going through her head the whole time. And then this scream. Again, there's a lot of theorizing that Arcane is also going to be an origin story for Warwick, which seems plausible from all I know. I don't know that this is necessarily the scream that Warwick, that is mentioned in Warwick's story, necessarily. I don't know that that's necessarily this moment, but because I think, like, this scene, it's about Jinx and Vi. And so my read on it is that here, because the light between these two scenes is kind of similar, here Vi is saying something like, I have to go now, don't follow me. And here Jinx is seeing something terrible happen, or Vi apologizing for something that she has to do, like, I'm sorry, I have to leave you here, you have to stay here. It's a better future for you, or whatever. Like, she leaves Vi to be experimented on, leaves Jinx to be experimented on by terrible people because those people promised Vi that Jinx would have a better future or whatever. Like, something like that. Like, it's a moment of, like, Vi, not necessarily intentionally, but betraying her in a way that was very traumatizing. And she screams and tears are falling down out of her eyes, essentially, as we cut to the real world where, like, none of the mask is left. Like, she has lost all control over herself and her feelings. Like, none of that sort of very quiet, blank-faced inquisitiveness. This is all grief and trauma and hurt and anger and sadness. Just all of it just flying out. With some lovely smear frame animation to sell the punch. And again, these cross cuts back and forth between Jinx and Vi. Again, mirroring each other, right? As Jinx finally, like, having worked out this trauma attack, like, returns a little bit to the real world. And, like, you can just see, like, she poured everything into it. You can see how exhausted and how, like, and it's not just that she's physically exhausted, it's also emotionally. Like, she poured out everything there. Which is a lot to do. And yet, for all of that, for all of it, no matter how much she poured into it, 400 points. Still couldn't beat her. Which is like the final insult, you know? It's like, couldn't even exceed her, couldn't even spite her, couldn't have any kind of revenge on her. Because that's also what this is about, is a moment of vengeance, you know? Taking her high score away from her, however small that is. And you can see that that failure is, like, very, very frustrating to her. And so she does the most Jinx-like thing she has done in this entire animated segment. And pulls a gun on the issue. This is really, really good character animation. I want to stress that. Like, the feelings that are on display. What an animator does, when an animator is animating a character, they are being an actor. Just as surely as, like, as Leonardo DiCaprio or whoever are. They are being an actor. But rather than acting with their own bodies, they're acting through the characters here that they're animating like puppets. And so for an animator to portray a scene like this in a way that feels emotionally real, emotionally honest, it takes that same level of insight. Like, it takes that same ability to act a feeling out, to act a character's mood, their history, their baggage, to act all of that out in a way that feels believable. And the animators in charge of this have bloody well done that. Like, this is very good character animation. You can see that shit is going on inside of Jinx. You can see that she's feeling certain feelings. Like, you can see when she loses control. You can see that. It's in the acting. She doesn't have a line of dialogue here, but yet you understand what's going on, what she's doing, how she's feeling, because the animators are doing a damn good job of showing you. And, like, it's just good character animation. Like, it's just... and it's also, like, it's also good directing. Like, the director, the cinematographer, the storyboard artist, the people who are part of framing how this whole thing gets put together, the order of shots, the way that the shots are composed together, the way that the camera cuts, the way that, like, we get all this energy in this massive scene, right? Like, where every other part of this animated short before that, right? Like, the cuts are pretty infrequent, the camera's pretty calm, there's very rarely, like, a lot of sudden motion, there's not a lot of energy in anything that's happening. Like, even when Jinx shoots a bird, right? Like, it's just this brief explosion of energy and violence, boom, but then we go right back to complete stillness. Which is why when we get to Jinx freaking the fuck out. Look how the camera and the cutting changes. The cutting becomes rapid. Everything happens super quickly. Like, she moves quickly. The camera even becomes kind of handheld in moments, like following her around, jiggling. That's all. Like, that's the director, that's the cinematographer, that's the storyboard artist, that's the writers taking a lot of care to create scenes in which the character animator can create the performance that's necessary for the storytelling. And it's so fucking good. I am very, very excited for this series. I'll absolutely have quibbles and like nitpicks and all kinds of other bullshit with the series once it actually comes out. Of course I will, and I'll say those in a video, but what I want to say here is that the base level of quality that's being established, that's being established with this short clip is really fucking high. Like, a lot of effort, a lot of love, a lot of care and attention, and a lot of skill has gone into making this thing. Whether or not the final product turns out to be, like, as good as the sum of its parts remains to be seen, but the parts are pretty damn frickin' good, is what I'm trying to get at. Oh, Netflix lawyers, please do not copyright claim my video. I promise I'm only saying nice things, and this falls under the purviews of fair use. But, yeah, I can't be sure. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video for however long it's allowed to stay up, then you can hit the like, comment, and or subscribe buttons down below in order to see more videos that I do. Eventually, I will do an animation breakdown of this fucking show. I'll find a way to do it. I swear to God I will. So if you want more of this, my God, so much more of this. Like, you can't even imagine how much more of this there's going to be. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon, other things. And if you want to help me out, like, I probably won't be able to monetize a lot of that again because of copyright claims. So if you want to help me out, I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, I have a tip jar. You can use them if you want to. It's very helpful. It helps me pay my rent. It helps me pay for occasionally an editor who helps me with some videos here and there. It's very nice of you. You can do that. You don't have to, though. And if you're not in a position to be able to either, please don't worry about it. Anyway. Yes. Oh, right. I have to self-promote. I have a second channel where I do Let's Plays. I'm playing through Breath of the Wild over there. We're about to finish that game. Mass Effect 2 is going up on that channel. Hollow Knight also, so if you want to see that. And I have a shorts channel where I do very short-form video content about League of Legends champions and character design, and occasionally also a little bit of animation. I'm going to try and see if I can find a way to fit that into a 60-second format, so you can follow that one as well. Okay, that's enough self-promotion. Thanks for watching. Wear a mask, wash your hands, take the vaccine when it comes, and try to act in solidarity with those who are working to make the world a better place. Oh my God, at least I did not make this 2-minute animation breakdown take more than an hour.